Hello, Googleization Nation, and welcome to Beyond the Office, Building and Leading Remote Teams, a GGG Unleashed podcast with thought leader Bill Keller. You'll get the latest research, trends, and tips on remote work to build and lead cohesive teams around the world for the future of work. Let's begin.
Welcome to Beyond the Office, Building and Leading Remote Teams. I'm your host, Bill Keller. And on today's episode, we have Jody Padar with us, the Radical CPA. If you're into accounting, you're going to love this episode as we talk about the future of the industry and where it's going. And if you're not in accounting and you're in business, you're going to need to see this episode as well, so you understand what changes are coming and how you need to prepare as a business for this radical change. So Jody, it's great to have you on the show with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So you have a moniker that's quite unique, the Radical CPA, which you don't hear those two words, radical and CPA, going together very often. So you could tell us a little bit about how did you get that title and like a little bit about your history and your background.
Yeah, so years ago, I was starting a new firm. I had been in a traditional, I'll say old school firm, 7 partners, and I left it because I came off a really bad tax season, like many accountants do, considering tax season is tax season, right? And I joined my dad, who had a 1040 practice, but he really it was a small practice. It was a side practice. And the best advice my dad gave me, he said, was go find your own clients. And so I had to go find accounting and tax work and clients to serve. And what happened was at that time, we were just starting to use this thing called the cloud. Except they didn't call it the cloud back then. It was just called the internet. And what I realized is that when we started to use the internet and we used technology in a new way, there was this real-time disruption of how CPAs would work with their clients, right? And so that was years ago. Now today, people are still migrating to the cloud, which is like a whole nother story. But the idea is when you work with your clients in real time, there's a different set of expectations and there's a different way that you work with them. And I was pioneering that new firm 2010, 2011, then Xero came to the US, et cetera. So that's how I got to be the Radical CPA, because I was using these newfangled technologies. But what I realized is it wasn't just the technology that had to change, the rest of your firm had to change as well. So once you start working in real time, the way you train your team has to change. The way you price or you bill has to change, because how do you bill 2 minutes? You don't bill 2 minutes. You can't bill 2 minutes, right? You have to start pricing on value. Social media was just taking off in the world at that time. And the way you would accumulate new clients changed, right? And all of these things that we do today that people think are everyday, back then, they were really radical ideas, right? So fast forward now today, and I owned my own firm for 14 years. I sold my firm. I joined a couple tech startups, but now I'm back to being the Radical CPA pretty much 24/7. And the idea is moving forward, how is AI going to, again, disrupt that disrupt the accounting space to the next level, keeping me radical, right? So I'm always on the bleeding edge, kind of what's next, and willing to figure it out and pioneer it and, walk alongside accountants to help them figure it out as well.
Well, that's what we're excited to hear about today, how this bleeding edge is going to come into the mainstream. So that's super exciting. And to tell you how bleeding edge she is, the other day I was looking on LinkedIn and I noticed that she had a poll up there, and basically she made the comment, I don't believe the CPA firm is going to exist. I believe it was in 10 years. Is that a correct statement?
6 years.
6 years. Oh, even more radical. Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Well, if there's not going to be a CPA firm, what's there going to be? Tell us the future here.
So I believe there will always be CPA. So let's set that straight,
okay,
right?
Okay.
I think the AI CPA and the brand of a CPA and accounting professionals. I don't believe that AI is going to take away our jobs. I'm not part of that doomsday prophecy, right? That's not what I'm saying.
Everybody can put down their pitchforks and their torches. Okay. So
what I'm saying is the structure of a firm is not going to exist. So that means from way back when, 7 partners, the partnership model doesn't work. It hasn't worked for years. And all these outside forces are just making it come to light. So when you think about a traditional firm, the reason the partnership model doesn't work is because you have 7 different partners and none of them can agree on how to change, so they don't change, right? So that's what's kind of kept firms using their legacy ways. They haven't adopted technology. They haven't done all the things that they should have. The pandemic pushed them forward, kicking and screaming. But had we not had the pandemic, I would believe that we would still be back even behind with technology and things, because there was no impotence for them to move forward, right? So the structure of the CPA firm doesn't really work anymore. Then you have all these tech players coming in. So you have these startups, whether they be new startups, stealth startups, or startups that came around 5 or 7 years ago, but were kind of the first level startup who started serving customers differently. So they were born online, they built their systems and their processes online, and they have financial backing to help them iterate faster. So you have the Pilots of the world, the Zennies of the world, right? And they are out there. And if you don't know, Amazon invested $100 million in Pilot a couple of years ago. So if you don't think Amazon's going to start selling accounting services, like, I think, that's kind of seeing the future, right? It may not be today, but it's coming, right? So you have these online firms that are based in technology, and they're not firms, right? They are technology companies who are in the business of selling accounting and tax. And that was kind of that first level. Now you have some stealth startups who are actually going deeper into very specific, specialized tax niches and only selling that.
I just have a quick question. What is a stealth startup?
So a stealth startup is someone who's come to me and said, this is what I'm building, but the rest of the world doesn't know about it yet. So because of my status in the industry, a lot of people tell me stuff. So like, I kind of have a little bit of insight into kind of what's next that I'll say mainstream media doesn't know yet, right? And so they're still undercover, right? Like, they haven't announced to the world yet. Maybe they're getting funding, maybe they're not. They're building something in private, right? But there's a whole new level of stealth startups out there who are very specialized in the tax offerings or the accounting offerings that they're opening, and they can attract a very specific audience and serve a very specific audience, which I'll say is kind of that next level of that first level startup technology company. Then you have the fintechs who are selling money. So basically they have some sort of credit card fee that they started with. They started with selling a credit card, and then now they're using those small businesses. They're working with them to do accounting and tax work. So they're making money on exchange fees, but they're also doing accounting and tax work for their customers. So they're making money on making money, and they're reinvesting that money in building out systems, processes, technologies to serve their customers better. Now, if you think about just this tech side and the money side, they have the opportunity to innovate faster, to iterate faster, to do all that stuff that firms don't have because they don't have the legacy client base holding them back. And they also were built in a different mindset, right? They weren't built on like a local customer, right? So that's kind of this new age technology stuff that's happening. You also have the LegalZoom and Rocket Lawyer, who are also selling accounting and tax services, and they have DNA that came from Intuit. And you have Intuit, the technology company gorilla in the room, who is selling accounting and tax services to small businesses, and they're acquiring CPA firms, and they're doing this like live, right? They have like TurboTax Live, or they have QuickBooks Online Live, where you can, like, just as a small business owner, you log into Intuit, and they've offered you an option to talk to a human in real time, or set up an appointment with them, right? So you have this technology push. On the other side, you have this whole PE market, right? Where you've seen PE, private equity firms are coming in, they're buying parts of firms, they're combining lots of firms and restructuring them. And the reason private equity, I don't want to say makes sense, but the reason partners are selling to private equity is because they're getting cash out immediately. They're not waiting. If you know the way a traditional CPA firm merges, is basically you merge in your book of business and you don't necessarily get cash out today. It gets paid out over a number of years, or it gets paid out in your retirement. And that's all contingent that your book is going to stay with this new firm. And it's all contingent upon like how their partnership agreement works to pay you out. Whereas when private equity comes in, they give cash up front to the partners, and the partner, they have to do some things to maintain their book of business and to keep it there, but they're getting cash out today, right? It's a better deal, right, for the partners. And audit is kind of a unique beast because like you still have regulatory stuff with audit, but for the majority of the US firms, they're not doing audit anyways, right? Audit's really done by the really big firms. And most firms are doing regular accounting, taxes, small business advisory, things like that, right? And so when you look at that market and you see all these players coming in and you see this money happening, why do CPA firm owners who haven't changed in the past, who haven't kind of kept up with the times, who haven't really adopted the technology the way they should have, who are having a hard time finding talent, think that they will be around in 6 years, in 2030, when the AI forces are coming in, you have these technology companies, you have private equity, and all that money's pushing the market. And I'm not saying that you won't have an accountant. I'm just saying they're not going to work for a firm. They're going to work for a technology company who sells accounting and tax services. And oh yeah, they have a bunch of CPAs and accountants that help them, but they're not a professional services firm in the traditional sense. They don't bill by the hour. They price based on a result. Or you have a private equity firm that's going to own the bigger firms who, again, it's not going to be a firm. And those private equity firms, they have to cash out. So in 5 years, when they go to cash out, how are they going to cash out? They're going to go IPO. Because in order for the private equity guys to get their money out, they either have to sell again or they have to go public. So we're going to have publicly traded firms, I believe, and we're going to have kind of this technology company firm as well. And there are a handful of firm owners who have kind of started down this path who are not tech funded. Maybe they have funding, but they're not kind of based in technology. They've kind of put things together who are evolving as well. So I know it's a bold statement and it may not be in 6 years, but I believe it's inevitable because the firm model doesn't work anymore. It's not relevant. And it's kind of like the whole Blockbuster thing, right? Like everyone thought like, oh, Blockbuster's profitable, right? And that's not going to go away. If you read the story of Blockbuster, they were making a ton of money and then Netflix came in. So the reason CPAs have such a hard time is because they're still making money. They may not find talent, but they certainly are not having a hard time finding work to do. And the work that they are doing is significantly profitable. So it's very hard to get a CPA to look at a change when he's saying, I'm laughing all the way to the bank. Like you tell me, you're a prophet, you're preaching all this stuff, but I got money, so why would I change? Why would I rock the boat? Why would I disrupt it? Because I'm making money today. And that's our problem. That's fundamentally our problem.
And it's a very good question. I think it probably depends a little bit upon your time horizon and your outlook. If you're 5 years away from retirement, you probably, for a lot of people, unless they're really excited about this, they probably don't want to venture into this because there is a lot of work and there's a lot of change into it. And, they can probably get out on the other side, private equity and sell and just get out and they're good. But if they've got more time in, this is very similar to what I see kind of like with Kodak. You're talking about Blockbuster and a very similar type of thing where they were like, hey, they were a technology company. They had huge amounts of research and development, but they really never capitalized on their digital camera technology because they were afraid it was going to cannibalize their film technology. And in the same way, I can see that for a lot of these firms that they're afraid that, okay, if I do this, we're actually seeing that right now with AI is actually we're getting more efficient. We're automating because I have an automation company and I also have a remote staffing company. And we're seeing this where the automation can come in and I did an automation last year where we saved 5.5 hours a day of one individual's time. Well, and it took us 3 weeks to make the automation. Awesome. That's to do that kind of thing. And you're like, oh, it's already here. And that wasn't even AI per se. That was just what I consider just general automation and then throw AI on top of it. So that's fascinating, I see that, I can see that change, but I can see it's going to be very difficult for a lot of people in the industry to kind of make that leap. So how do you see this affecting, kind of moving and shifting to the users of these services, right? Rather than the accountants. And how do you see the users either both benefiting, and also what do they need to know to make sure that they can take advantage of this change?
So I think the users have to kind of reset themselves as well. And they have to realize that they're going to be paying for a result, not for the time spent. And so, like kind of get rid of that whole billable hour mindset, right? Like whoever the small business owner is, you should be paying for a result, not kind of, and we train the small business owner to do this. So like if we've trained you that we sell time and not a result, like I'll say it's our own fault in the professional services firm, right? To train you to do that. But we have to look for someone who's selling a result and not the time spent. And the reason that's important is because the person who's still billing by time is not giving you the best service because they're not the most efficient. And the reason they're not the most efficient is and I would say efficient and effective, because you have to be both. It's not just about efficiency, right? You could be efficiently doing the wrong things, right? Yeah. But the idea is if you traditionally have billed by the hour, and it's kind of against you to kind of develop that automation to take away that 5.5 hours of work, right? Because now it's like, well, wait, how am I going to make money if I don't do that, right? So I would argue that the customer that you want to work with, or the firm that you want to work with, is charging you based on a result, not based on time spent. So if they give you an invoice or a budget, right, they give you a quote that says, well, if it's going to take so many to so many hours and we're going to charge you X hours, I would push back and say, okay, I want to pay for a result, not for the time spent, right? And then, and I would use that kind of as a litmus test of how automated they are, because the more automated they are, that's going to show you that they're more automated and they're using these tools to give you a better service, right? And the reason automation is so important is because in order for a CPA to get to advisory work, the work has to be done and it has to be done correctly. And the reason in the past, accountants haven't been always the best advisors. And again, I would argue they're the most trusted advisors, but a lot of times they get caught up in time, is just they haven't had the time to get the work done and get it done correct. So you have to have the work done and done correctly in order to add that next level of advisory on it. And if you're using AI and machine learning to kind of get your, build your ground level of the house, now you as an advisor, now the accountant can really come in and give you a lot more insights on top of that work. But it's very hard to give insights on bad data, right? So the accountants have always spent all their time getting the data right. Well, the idea of technology is going to get that data right. And now they're really going to be able to help you unpack that data. What does it mean for your business? How can it help you? How can you, effectively use tax laws better? All of that stuff is good stuff, because now we can do what we're trained to do and not worry about just getting the data right, which unfortunately has been what most of our work has been in the past, just because, you can't do advice with bad data.
So you kind of talked about three things there, and I agree on that. The question that I have, and I guess the concern that I have is, are most CPAs going to be able to make that shift, right? They're so caught up in the numbers. Are they going to be able to make that shift to advisory? I don't even know if that's a question for you, but I think that's a concern that I have, that I've seen within the industry as I've worked with people. They get caught up in the numbers. They think that that's the end result, not understanding that we're trying to make decisions as business owners based upon that data rather than just having the numbers themselves. So it'll be very interesting to see whether they can make that shift. But I'm kind of curious. You talked about basically the tech side. You're going to have changes, I think, in the staffing side, and then also changes on the client side. And you touched a little bit on some of these, but how do you see that playing out, like let's just say the staff side, because I want to get a little bit deeper into that, and then also on the tech side. What comes first? How do you go about this change, and what's it going to look like for each of those components?
So I think for the staff side, it's going to be an interesting transition, because they'll probably pick up the tech right away, but they're going to need help with the advisory. Most people who have been in the industry for a while have done some sort of advisory work. And again, I think accountants have always been advisors. I don't think they've called it advisory. I think they've sold compliance and put advisory on it, but they sold compliance. They didn't sell advisory. They never separated the two out, right? So I think many good CPAs have done advisory in the past. So I don't want to discount that. But I think the next generation is going to have to learn advisory a lot faster. And the good thing is I'm hoping, and again, like the tools are going to help us get to advisory faster as well, right? Like, I don't think the tools are going to give you that empathy. I don't think the tools are going to give you the right way to have the conversation. Those are soft skills, and you're going to have to get a little human with that. But I'm hoping that a lot of the tools will give you kind of the basic tax knowledge, the technical knowledge that you used to have years of experience to get, right? So hopefully the machine learning, the AI is going to give you that technical level. And then you're going to have to learn to kind of have those soft skills. And so I think that the team is going to have to up their game on learning those soft skills faster. And again, you can be efficient and not effective. And I think that that's what the team needs to remember. Again, like those new professionals who are starting their careers, is the work that I'm doing efficient, but is it also effective? And if you're doing something that's not effective, then you need to question why you're doing it. And you need to think about how you can be more effective in your job. So I think that's kind of the takeaway for the next generation of team. And the cool thing is if you have a person or a person you work for who's not the best teacher, go to YouTube, go to like LinkedIn. There's so many places that you can get that education, even if you work for a bum boss, right? Like when I was learning, right? Like you had the people who you learned from, but you really didn't have the web as access to learn something new. Now you don't, if you're working in a job and your boss isn't the best teacher, go look it up, go figure out how to do it. And the cool thing is the next generation today already has that skill set because if they don't like their math teacher at school, they go to YouTube and they learn how to do the math themselves. And I've seen it firsthand, right? So I think that's the thing for the next generation professional to learn is just be curious and be willing to find the answer, be willing to learn how to be more human, to have those conversations. And hopefully your boss is going to give you that. But if your boss doesn't give it to you, you're not stuck with not learning it. There's plenty of options to go learn.
Well, one of the things, I think it was a quote that you said, and I might get this a little bit wrong, but the more we automate, the more human we need to become. Is that a correct quote? And so I think that was that's what I heard or was thinking about when you were talking about this, that being effective and understanding those soft skills is going to be to understand what that means to their business, how it's going to affect them moving forward, and how they can use that data to then make effective decisions for their business. So
yeah, that's what's going to be your linchpin. That's what's going to make you special. That's what's going to make you different, and that's what's going to help you stand out in your career.
There's a couple things you said about going to YouTube. I had a CPA, actually Gretchen Nasso, on a show just a couple weeks ago, and she was talking about how they're not seeing the growth from some of the younger professionals because they've been working remotely that they've seen in the past. They were expecting them to be further along. So how do you kind of reconcile these two things where, they have the access to YouTube, they have the access to all these resources now, but I'm not sure if they're not using it or they're not effective. So what would you tell that person who's, starting out their career and just starting to learn, what are they going to need to do if they're working remotely or even in the office to be able to level up much quicker?
So the hard thing about working remotely is that their bosses or the managers or their leaders don't necessarily know how to work remotely. And I be quite honest, they don't know how to deliver remote work, because when you deliver remote work, you base it on results, and you have to explain things a lot more up front. You have to do a lot more teaching on the front end or explaining on the front end. And if you look at traditional firms, if you build by the hour, it was always like you passed the work, you never did any front end work with it, you never really helped them. And then the team member either understood it or they didn't understand it. Maybe they asked questions, maybe they didn't. And then they were kind of judged after the fact. They got 4 pages of review notes, right? That's the way a traditional firm works. That doesn't work in a remote world. It doesn't. You have to be a lot more intentional about how you give work out to younger employees, about how you explain things, about how you do training on the front end. And unfortunately, that's the world that this next generation is living in, right? Like they kind of got thrown into this remote workforce, and the managers didn't necessarily get trained on how to teach employees remotely, right? And so I would say to these young professionals, if they're not getting but they need to be the ones who are proactive and step up and kind of figure out how to work with their boss and ask more questions. And, I don't want to say be a little bit annoying, but like
that's okay. Yeah, I think they need to. I think they need to be.
If you're out of sight, you're out of mind. And it's not that your managers are ignoring you. It's just they have 25 other things on their plate and they're getting through their own list of things to check off. And if you're not in their face, in their Slack channel, in their, guess what? You're not in sight of them. And whether it's right or wrong, it's the situation it is. And it's up to you as a young professional to kind of get what you need to take it to the next level. And unfortunately, nobody tells you that as a young professional, right?
Well, it's one of the tenets. We go through a book at our firm. Basically, it's called The Traveler's Gift, 7 Decisions for Personal Success. And the first one is the buck stops here. And so we talk a lot about responsibility, about basically Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where it talked about be proactive. And where you need to take responsibility for your career, for your learning. If you're waiting for somebody else to do it and to bring it to you, you're more than likely going to be in sorry shape. Maybe you get lucky, you get that one boss out of 10 or maybe even 100 who is exceptional at leading and growing his staff. But if not, it's your responsibility to level up. And so I think that's awesome. So I heard the advice for the young professional. Now let's flip to that. What would you say for the manager who's now leading remote in a world that they're unfamiliar with? They're used to basically going up to somebody, they see them, they come behind them while they're working on the computer, and maybe they're pointing something out, and they do this. They see this proximity as a necessity for training, and so I think that's really been a big push to bring people back into the office because people haven't learned some of the new skills that they're needing to be effective long term. There's a difference because I think sometimes they see productivity move up in the short term, which might be fine because they get more focus, but long term, they're probably losing something because they're losing that connection, they're losing some of those training skills. How would you recommend that they level up their ability to manage remotely and get the best out of their team?
So I think you have to be very intentional about it as a manager. I think you need to, even though nobody wants another meeting, I think you need to have that daily check-in with your team, because that's the only way you're going to build rapport. Even if it's not every day, every other day, kind of get to know them as humans, right? And then I think you have to rethink the way you delegate work and kind of, again, if you're not managing via timesheet, which is the way traditional managers have always learned how to manage in a firm, you need to rethink what is the end result that you want? How can you kind of give them what they need to do it? And then I think the other thing, what you can do is, and I think it's really important, is kind of have these online remote sessions where maybe once a week, you're just sitting online, working side by side, right? Okay. So it's, for 3 hours on, a Thursday afternoon, it's no meetings, and we're just kind of in this work group where we're working alongside each other in a remote world. And we have the opportunity to ask a question, and to really ask a question, not necessarily, because sometimes in the Slack world, it's async. So you might ask a question, but then the person doesn't get back to you for another 2 hours. And so, but if you can kind of set up that meeting time once a week where you kind of hang out with your team and you give them that space to develop, kind of just like being in the office, I think actually it's a much better productive use of time than everyone going to the office and then being on Zoom calls all day anyways, when you're really not there anyways. So just be intentional about that time. And that's kind of like the work time where you have the opportunity to work together. I think it's a little bit weird at first, but especially I think the older generation thinks it's a little bit weird, but how many times is the next gen watching movies together remotely? They did that even before COVID, and they don't think anything of it. It's just like hanging out in an online community together.
That's great advice. I love that. And I think I love that word intentionality. I've said that before. And I think that is so critical to make sure that a lot of people think it's just going to happen. It's just going to come together. And it doesn't unless you're intentional about that. And so I think you're spot on there. So looking at the tech world, I'm a question that I keep having, and I don't know if you've heard of Peter Diamandis. He was in the X Prize and wrote a bunch of books, Bold and other ones, and really talking about the AI world and how fast the iterations are going to come. So my question to you is so somebody's going into this and saying, okay, we need to really get our tech game in order, but how far do you go? Right? I mean, because you can go really far down that rabbit hole as a firm, and you keep going. How do you gauge and judge how much time, effort, and energy you're going to put into the tech side of the business? Because it's almost a never-ending situation. As you just say, I'm going to devote this amount of my time, this amount of my budget, and continue to move forward, or how do you go gauge what's the right amount?
So I think you have to step back a minute and say strategy. What is my intention of this technology? Do I want to use it to increase customer service or, customer experience, client experience? Do I want to use this technology to prepare a tax return faster, right? So step back and say, okay, what are my firm's strategic goals? And then say, okay, now how are we going to use automations? How are we going to use technology to get it there, right? So I think it starts with the business purpose, not the technology, because otherwise you get lost in the widget. And at the end of the day, the money has to be for a business purpose. And if you take the tech away from the business, then it's just wasted money, right? The other thing I think you have to think through is you can't do nothing. And the reason I say if you do nothing, it's some of those mistakes that you make along the way are going to make you better faster. So if you make a few missteps early, you're still far ahead of the people who did nothing, right? So and that's just innovation in general. That's not technology, and that's innovation. The innovator is going to make a few mistakes. Part of innovation is making those mistakes and rebounding from them so that you can get to the next level, right? So it's okay to make a little bit of mistake there. The third thing is when you think about it, if you're a big firm, you're going to have a lot more resources to kind of figure out what you're going to do. If you're, I'll say, mid to small size firms, a lot of the innovation is being done for you. It's being built into the software that you're currently using. So don't feel like, oh my God, I have to build this brand new tax LLM, right? You don't need to go build some new model and spend developers and do all that stuff. Chances are that model is going to just come into the regular tax software that you use today, right? The technology companies are putting AI, machine learning into the software that you currently use. Where I think you could spend money, and I know you have an automation company, is but on automating certain tasks to kind of get things moving faster. Because I think those are kind of quick wins that you'll see help you move faster. And the thing about automation and innovation is once you start doing it, it's kind of like a drug. You get addicted to it because you're like, oh, that gave me 4 hours of time back. What am I going to do next, right? And once that kind of takes root in your firm, the people in your firm are going to be excited about it. They're going to be thinking about things that they do every day that they hate doing, that they put off doing, that they're going to be like, hey, can we automate this or whatever? And I to me, that's the excitement. That's the spark that lights the fire to get you moving towards an innovative firm mindset, because that's ultimately what you should take away is, not everything is going to change all at once. And we talked about at the beginning, the firm, is it going to be here? Is it not? Your best bet is to have a firm that's innovating on a regular basis and moving towards it. Whether you get there or not, it doesn't matter, but it's about kind of changing the culture of your firm to put that innovation in your DNA so that you're not frightened by all this stuff. You're embracing it and you're excited about how it's going to help you do your job better and learning the next skill set that goes along with it.
I kind of think when you're talking about this, those missteps, I don't know if you've ever heard of the J curve, which is basically, you've heard, I'm sure most people have heard of, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Those are the kind of some of those missteps that you're going to take because you're going to be walking down this path and you're going to make some missteps and you're like, oh, it was easier the other way, right? But that's part of the process. It's going to get worse. Kind of like when you go to the gym for the first time, you're like, this hurts, right? But then you start to see the results after a period of time, and then you really start to move forward. And I think that that's really important, that people are going to need to understand that as they walk down this path, there's going to be these challenges. And if they don't understand that up front, they're going to very quickly fall off that path. And so it's really important to set your expectations correctly up front to make sure that you're prepared for the challenges ahead.
Yeah, and I think CPA as a whole are they want best best practices, right? Like they don't want to be the innovators. They want it to just work. And unfortunately, I don't think that's realistic. I don't think it ever was realistic, but more so today, it's not realistic because everything's moving so fast. By the time someone who's kind of gone before has figured out that best practice, it's already obsolete. So like you have to kind of, and again, that's why it's like you have to figure out how to put innovation into your firm so that you can keep moving forward. And I would also say not get blindsided by the fact that you're never going to be perfect in what's latest and greatest because it's always moving, right? Like how are we ever going to get there? So you just got to be good with kind of the journey and knowing that you're moving towards it.
We kind of talked about the tech space, and I want to go back to the staffing space because that's the kind of the world that I live in. And I think people are kind of curious. I promote working overseas, where there's a dearth of talent within the US right now as far as in the accounting space. There's not enough CPAs, there are not enough bookkeepers and accountants, and that's one of the ways to alleviate that. But if it was all sunshine and roses, everybody would be doing it. But it's not. There's some challenges along the way, and I'm curious to hear what have been some of your challenges, but then also what have you seen from a win side, maybe not you, but maybe some of the people that you've worked with, and how should we go forward or how should we think about that process, whether it's overseas or even domestic remote work. What is your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it gets back to intention, and it's essentially, if your person is sitting in Wisconsin or they're sitting in South America, or they're sitting in India or the Philippines, wherever they're sitting, it's the same remote work. Right? So you have to think about how you hand out that remote work. You have to be intentional about it. You have to be intentional about what your expectation is on what you want back from them. And again, I think, the things that I said before, like, is there a way that you can work with them remotely where you have an opportunity to kind of hash things out, right? Like, is there an opportunity every day or every other day where you're syncing with that team member wherever they're sitting at a time zone that's mutually convenient, and you kind of work through that because you have cultural differences, you have time zone differences, you have all those differences. But at the end of the day, it's all work, and professionals want to do a good job. I don't think professionals sitting somewhere else across the world want to give you a piece of work that you're not happy with. They want to do a good job, but it's up to you as that manager or the person facilitating that work to be explicit about what you need back and to help them get there. And I think that's where kind of remote work fails overall. It doesn't matter if they're sitting in Wisconsin or they're sitting in South America.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think that we often take somebody who was working in the firm, so they understand the culture, they understand how to sync together, and then when you take them remote, there's still some more syncing than if you just take somebody who just started in a remote capacity. And so that's where it gets difficult because then they say, oh, this remote stuff doesn't work. Or why does it work domestically? Well, because you were working with this person before and you worked and you built that relationship to make a tighter integration in a physical setting. And then when you took it apart, it still continued to work. Maybe not as well as it could have or did before. But then when you bring new people in and you don't have that ability to connect in a physical space because you haven't developed these new ways of working, then you often look at it, or there's problems and there's challenges. And what the biggest problem I see is most people don't allow enough time to work through the issues. And what I tell most people is you need to have an HR R&D budget, right? What is that? What is the newest innovation? And maybe it's not new for the industry as a whole, but it might be new for your firm, and you're going to need time to kind of work through those issues. But I think if you can get through the other side, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities for you. But I think these new ways of working in a remote world, whether it's in Wisconsin or overseas, is great.
And it's training both ways, right? So it's training the managers to learn how to work async, right? So when you think about a Slack channel, right? Like, how is work delivered in a Slack channel, right? Or a Teams channel, whatever. Like, when you're in person, the hardest thing, when you're 100% remote or you're 100% in person, I would say it's easy because your culture is either 100% remote or it's 100% in person. It's when you have this mix where some of the stuff gets said in the office and it never makes it to the Slack channel. And so I think the hard part, and again, this is like customs and procedures and things that you have to build into your culture of being this async kind of firm where you have remote workers, is how do you put all of that documentation in a place where people are seeing it and they're embracing it, whether they put a thumbs up or whatever, right? So you know that they saw it, and we get everybody kind of on the same page in that channel versus, there are people who don't necessarily like to write out everything. Well, fine, then make a Loom video, right? Like you don't want to write it all, make a Loom video. And there's so many tools now that you can use. There's, I think it's called Scribe, where you can document a process really, really quick. Like the tools are there. You just have to learn how to use them. And you have to remember that if someone's sitting across the world in a different time zone, you have to kind of write out all of that process stuff that in the old world, you would just walk into their cube or walk into the office and kind of explain it to them. You're going to have to spend a little time doing it. But the cool thing about it is once you do it, if you do it, you don't have to do it for the next person because you already have it documented, which again, it may take you 10 more minutes on the front end, but then when you get another team member, you already have that documentation there. You don't have to redo it, right? So I think it's just a custom for both sides of the team to be working.
And that kind of reminded me of a book, and it was Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Vaden. And he has what's called the focus funnel. And I think you were talking about, basically the automation. So what he talks about is first, can you eliminate it? Do I really need to be doing it to begin with? Then can I automate it? Then can I delegate it? And then it has to come to me. Then if I don't need to do it right now, I procrastinate. And then if I need to do it right now, it's something that I do right at the moment. And so I think that was a really good book and a really good framework. So somebody's looking for that type of framework to understand. And he even had some like rules of thumb as far as when you should be automating, when you should be delegating, like how much time you can save, like how much the time is it going to take to train somebody to what you're going to get out in the end. And so that might be a good book for somebody, but those are excellent pieces of advice.
And I also think that many firms just don't even know that these basic tools are out there, right? Like they don't even realize that there's a tool out there like Scribe that they can document a process in 2 minutes. And so they might be doing it in Word, or they might be doing it the old-fashioned way of screenshotting. And so that process now takes them 3 hours, or takes them 3 hours instead of realizing that there's a new tool out there that does it in a couple of minutes. And so how do we help the firm owners who aren't used to working remote learn the tools that can help them be remote easier? Because I think it's kind of this fear. It's like you don't know what you don't know. And so you're freaking out when reality is, post-pandemic, there's so many, just even since I would say the middle of last summer, the tools that you can use to work remote are 10 times better than they were just 2 years ago.
It's amazing. So what are you seeing, like, as you're looking into the future? I'm curious, what kind of tech are you seeing on the horizon that you're super excited about?
So I like all this, and here's a place for AI that's not in numbers, but I see as a huge win. So the ability to transcribe everything, the meeting notes, right? Like you can, even I think in Zoom, you can do it now where it gives you an output of like what was said, right? Like you can take that information and you can knock it down to bullets. So what used to leave a meeting and then maybe it took you a half hour to kind of figure out what you had to like next step, whatever, right? Like now all that stuff just happens, right? So like it's really easy to kind of get to the next step of things. So all this documentation, I think is huge, especially for people who don't like to document. And I'm that person. I hate documentation.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you on that one, 100%.
But now that I have tools like Scribe and like all this AI, it's like, oh, I could do that. It's not this like mind block that, oh my God, like it used to be this thing I never wanted to deal with and I was the worst and I would delegate it, but it was never done exactly the way I wanted, whatever. Anyways, when you have tools like this, now like you can do that. And again, when you're working remote, documentation is huge. And as you grow a company, documentation is huge.
So you've been very generous with your time. And as we kind of, my last question to you is, what advice would you have a firm owner who is looking to move forward here, doesn't really know where to start? How would you get going? Where should they go? What resources should they start looking at to get them moving in the right path?
So a little bit of self-promotion here. I'd say follow me on LinkedIn, right? I give a lot of tips and tricks out, right? But I think the thing is to make the commitment that you're going to move, right? And then start just doing basic research about kind of what the other firms are doing. I'll call them the progressive firms, and start seeing what they're doing. Tax Twitter is a great place to see where people are talking about things that are happening next. I would say go online to find stuff. Talk to other firm owners who are doing things as well. I think, again, you can go to a conference and you can learn a lot, but typically you learn more from the guy sitting next to you than you do from the person on the stage.
Unless you're the person on the stage.
But talk to your peers, find out what they're doing, right? Just kind of start consuming this information. And there's enough, I'll say, generic AI information out there. There's enough information for you to kind of get that baseline to just level set. And then you'll decide if you want to be the one who's kind of pushing things, or you're going to wait a little bit and wait for it to come to you. But all I can say is educate yourself. And it changes so fast that you're just going to have to kind of, you stay on it. So it's just like tax law, right? Like everyone says CPAs aren't innovative, but everybody knows that tax laws change every year, and yet CPAs are always on it, and they're thinking about the opportunities that come along with tax laws. So, and they're always changing. So same thing with AI, machine learning, technology, just put it in that set, sign up for a bunch of newsletters and start getting that information so that you can kind of even see how it cycles through and how the things are evolving, because it's the same as tax laws. Because once you start following tax, that stuff changes and you kind of get a baseline in it and you're comfortable with it. So same thing with technology.
So I know people are going to ask this. So do you do consulting? If people are interested, as the Radical CPA, can they call you and ask you to help them through this transition, or is that not something you do?
No, so they can call me. I have a new book coming out. So I'm launching it at Engage in June. So my book is Radical Pricing. There'll be pre-orders soon, so you can go find my book and order it from CPA Trendlines. We're going to be doing a bunch of stuff around the book. So we'll be doing masterminds and stuff like that. So I think that's probably, I'll say, the connection to me. I'm not opposed to doing consulting. But the hard thing about consulting is it's just me, right? And so I like to consult on really innovative things. Anyways.
And for those of you who don't know a little bit about her background, you were actually working on a product with April, competing with Intuit, and also you were working in the AI, I think it was BotKeeper, the AI world, as well for other startups. And so you've been in all areas, not just the firm area, but also really involved in the tech side. So this is why it's so great to have you on. So where can people find out more about you?
So you can find me at theradicalcpa.com, or really the best place to find me is on LinkedIn, because connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect to everyone. You can follow me there as well. And I'm giving out almost daily, I'm giving out tips and tricks and everything about, living in the CPA world as we know it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. And really appreciate you having you on the show. And this has been awesome. And maybe we can have you back another time. And so for Beyond the Office, thanks for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you next time. So if you'd like to learn more about remote staffing, feel free to message us for our free guide, The 7 Deadly Sins of Remote Staffing, and how to make sure that you don't commit them and you're successful in your remote hiring journey.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in and digging deep into what's ahead for the future of remote work. We'll be back next month with Bill for another episode. But until then, please visit Staffing Global's website for additional resources at staffdifferent.com. And remember, don't let the shift hit your plans.